have sliding.
I have those.
Put it on.
It doesn't work. We tried.
The what? Doesn't clip?
It clips, but then no one can hear you. I don't have like a lapel like you do.
Switch?
No.
Why not?
Because
Why
you're
not?
the star.
No, I'll put it on my lapel. If it's a lapel thing. Hot, hot.
Very nice. I mean, this is essentially as high as huh? Oh, but okay.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Yeah, we can start recording. Thank you, Dana. All right. Glad to see everyone on this cold, blustery night. We are going to be recording this session, and we're also streaming, I believe. So welcome to those of you who are joining us online as well. And we'll share this with the congregation as people are. If you need to leave early, just it'll be available to you. It's lovely to see such a great turnout tonight. I know many of you have been studying in Elhanan Brown's class, our wonderful guest educator for this week. If you are in the class, we've been in it for 6 weeks. Will you raise your hand just so we can see? So there's a nice smattering of people who've been in the class, and some of you maybe had the opportunity to be learning with Elhanan this week at Tulane. Welcome to all of you, and the rest of those who are visitors and guests. We're going to have hopefully a really interesting conversation tonight with lots of food for thought, and I'm so grateful that to the Grant Center for the American Jewish Experience at Tulane for helping to facilitate this wonderful week that we're having with Elhanan. And welcome to Dr. Ilana Horwitz, who is not only a board member here at Touro and the wonderful connector between Touro and New Orleans and Elhanan, but also an exceptional sociologist and educator. And we're just really glad to be all here together to share our thoughts as I don't remember what order we did, but a rabbi, a sociologist, and as an Israel educator walked into a bar. Our Jewish future on the rocks. So we're pretty.
We should have had some.
Right, I know we're just a little proud of that title, and I just want everyone to appreciate it. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we don't often bring our cocktails into the chapel. I would have thought about that and placed it somewhere else. So the plan for this evening is to have hopefully a really interesting and free-flowing discussion about this moment in our Jewish lives from the perspective of American Jews, from the perspective of Israeli Jews, from the perspective of the relationship between those two population centers, because those are the two largest Jewish population centers in the world. We're basically sorted into English speakers and Hebrew speakers with, certainly there are Jews in other places, but for the most part, these are the two nerve centers of Jewish life in this moment in the 21st century, and we're going to talk about that. We threw out a few listening/viewing options for you that some of you may have been able to engage with. We are going to react to some of those discussions, but I think you'll still get plenty out of this discussion, even if you didn't have a chance to listen. And I do encourage you to listen to those resources even after the fact. So I want to. And then we'll also leave time for questions at the end of this discussion. I want to begin by situating us the way that Barry Weiss situated the Jewish community when she spoke at the GA this past year, right? A few months
November,
ago.
at the General Assembly.
Yes, the General Assembly. But I think. And then we are going to react to some of her framings, but I think just to take in for a moment, there's a lot that she said that's sort of indisputably true, and I'm going to share a few of those thoughts so that we can all engage in that idea. So her speech was called "The Old World is Not Coming Back," and some of you were here when Dr. Horwitz and Dr. Yavnik Close, right, you and Naomi did, reacted to Frank Boer's article in The Atlantic, "The Golden Age of American Judaism is over," is over, or is ending, or has ended, or something to that effect. So it's much in that vein, but she goes into detail, and I'll just share a few things. She begins by just listing some significant examples of frequent and serious anti-Semitism, both here in the United States and across the world, and I'll just spout off a few of the things that she mentioned. She talked about the flare-up of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories after 9/11. She talked about Daniel Pearl's execution. She talked about the Buenos Aires JCC bombing. She talked about the Chabad of Mumbai's bombing. She talked about the school shooting in Toulouse, about Charlottesville. She talked about the Colleyville hostage crisis that one of my colleagues and classmates, Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker, when his community was held hostage for a number of hours. She talked about the Chabad of Poway shooting. Of course, she talked about the anti-Semitism that was sort of at the helm of the Women's March. She talked about the rise of Jeremy Corbyn in England, and of course she talked about Pittsburgh. And then she talked and then she talked about October 7th and the aftermath of October 7th and the marches immediately after and gatherings immediately after the attacks of October 7th that seemed to just revel and delight in news of Jewish death and the exhilaration that was expressed by so many in our country and around the world at this horrific incident, and protests around the country at college campuses that, for whatever else they did or intended, certainly sheltered significant anti-Semitic rhetoric and ideologies. And she says, perhaps at the time, each one of these discrete events seemed like a nightmare or a flu, something terrible to be endured until in good time it will pass. But those who came from other places around the world, she says, Jews who come from other places around the world have always been alive to these kinds of threats against us and alive to the potential threat to the liberty that American Jews enjoy and have enjoyed for generations, and that have left us, she says, comfortably sleepwalking. And she says, if you find yourself asking in this moment, can you believe it? Then you need to ask yourself why reality is catching you off guard. What little lies, what lies of omission, what lies told in the name of being politically correct or polite are you telling yourself even today? Acknowledging, she says, that many of the institutions that have turned against certain Jews are institutions that we founded and helped to build, that the American Jewish community, our names are on the wall, and we helped to strengthen these institutions. And how did this happen? And she concludes the last bit of quote that I'll do is she says, we need to be able to say that the politics of the mob, no matter which mob, will always be dangerous for Jews, have always been dangerous for Jews, and will always be dangerous for Jews. What this moment requires is the truth, the hard, uncomfortable truth, not backing down from telling it to ourselves and others, and realizing that good ideas and good people don't just win on their own, they need others to defend and promote them. If it feels like the end, it's because new beginnings always do. So I wanted to share that as kind of our jumping off point for the evening, and to ask our guests tonight, and I'll share as well, where does this description of this Jewish moment find the two of you? Ilana, you have spent your career studying the Jewish community of America, and you're a scholar. How do you take in her analysis? And then Elhanan, how do you take it in?
Great. Can you hear me? Okay, I think this works. As awkward as it is. Great question. So I'll start by saying that I was at the GA when this talk was delivered. The General Assembly, for those of you who don't know, is the gathering for thousands of Federation employees as well as lay leaders. And it's important to know that because there's a particular context in which the speech is given, and I want to speak to that. And I was there because I was giving a talk about economically vulnerable Jews, but I was in the audience. And so when I first heard it, I think there were a lot of moments for me that resonated, like the kind of call to action and this kind of, I don't want to sort of sound of alarm, but in that moment of sitting in a room of a couple thousand people who are all there because they really care about the Jewish community, I felt really kind of, I wouldn't say enthusiastic, but it resonated with me. And I will say it resonated with me not just as an academic, but I'm an immigrant from the former Soviet Union, and she specifically talks about like, oh, Jews from certain places, from Iran and Jews from the former Soviet Union, right? They know what's going on because this is not new for them. And I can say that for myself, that rang true. But there were moments in that speech, and I think this, when I heard it again in recent days and preparing for this, this bothered me. So for example, she mentions the attack at Tulane, and the way in which it's framed as an attack. And I've watched the video of what happened at Tulane, and I have some students here, so you can ask them
Your students
afterwards
want to
about
hear
their
you better,
experience.
so we're going to give you
Okay. Oh, yep, that's a big difference. Great. So she frames it as an attack on Tulane students. But if, you know, my interpretation and sort of what I saw happen in that moment is, you know, for those of you who weren't there, right, there was a public piece of property on Tulane's campus where this protest happened, and on one side you had a lot of Loyola students and other people who had gathered to, I think, provoke and intimidate Tulane students who they know are very Zionist, and there was a lot of yelling back and forth, right? And there was a truck that went back and forth in a very incendiary way with men wrapped in keffiyehs, and at one point, and the groups were yelling at each other, and at one point, the men started to burn the Israeli flag. And at that moment, two male Jewish students from Tulane jumped in and grabbed the flag, and then they got attacked. And I think that is a little bit what I think her initial remark of like, oh, Jewish students at Tulane getting attacked, makes it sound like, oh, someone is innocuously walking by and they just get attacked. Those students made the decision, and I'm not evaluating their decision, they made the decision to sort of get into the brawl. And so there was moments in her speech, and I think it happened repeatedly, where there was kind of a tone that she used that created a sense of fear that I thought was maybe excessive. And I get that in that context of the GA, it may have felt appropriate because you are trying to inspire thousands of people to sort of see something that maybe they're not seeing. So I take that sort of, that context in which she's giving it in as a point of reflection, that speech wouldn't have landed as well in other spaces. And this is interesting because, okay, so Elhanan and I have known each other since we were teenagers. We went to Camp Ramah together. And occasionally, especially since October 7th, we'll send each other articles or stuff we see on social media, and I'm like, is this true, and whatever. And so I sent him this talk, and I said, wow, how do you feel about this? So.
Right. How do I feel about it? And then he said, so first of all, I appreciate Barry Weiss because she interviewed Seinfeld, and my first degree is in Seinfeld. And she made him cry, so that's my respect for Barry Weiss coming into it, so I came in non-biased in that way, okay? I didn't like her speech. I thought it was alarmist, okay? And then, as you said, like, I also think about it now, and you talked beautifully about the context, right? If you think about it, she knows her audience, she has a podcast, she's a public speaker, she's speaking at the GA, she has a goal, right? So she's using it and taking things and using it to become alarmist. I don't like alarmists. She also used the example of it was just right after Amsterdam, okay? I know I got videos from people who were in Amsterdam. There was a lot of provocation there. I know Maccabi Tel Aviv fans. I'd beat some of them up, okay? But when you put it in that broader context, then it's once again, Jews are being attacked, okay? And she's trying to say, zoom out, don't zoom in. So what I'm saying is, and then putting on where I'm coming from, I understand that she knew where she wanted to land, right? I think I spoke about this in class. She knew where she wanted to land. She wanted to get people to say, there is anti-Semitism on the rise, and before it's too late, you better yada yada. And I'm not sure what her yada yada is, because, yada yada. So that's my reaction to it. And I think it also speaks very much to what I've experienced this year tremendously. And I say to people, so for I've been leading a lot of volunteer missions. Let's give a little shout out to some of my volunteers. We have Bonnie, we have Julie, okay, who came, and of course, yes, Bali, okay. So we have 3 of your community who have showed up in Israel, and we're doing incredible volunteer work. By coincidence, right? And I was fortunate enough to also meet them in Israel. And one of the things that I try to express is that the realities, when you're in it, you got to see what's going on as it's going on. So that alarmist aspect of it is hard for me, right? But at the same time, I'm trying to understand, because one of the things that I hear and I'm learning is that a lot of the people who are coming to Israel to volunteer have said to me, finally, when I landed in Israel, that's when I felt safe. And that informs me this war has many, many fronts. And what Barry Weiss is talking about is trying to heighten what's happening in America. And for me as an Israeli, so I'm not, and I'm going to do what I'm asking kind of some people to do. I'm not going to judge your alarmist sentiments, because that's what you have skin in the game, okay? And so I also wanted to be to take, when I'm rereading it, knowing where she's coming from and I'm not going to judge her specifically, okay? I will in private, right? But I'm not. But recognizing that there is a difference when you look at something when you have skin in the game, and when you have less skin in the game. And that's where I'm going to stand with that.
Thank you. I think my reaction, we'll do questions at the end. My reaction to that list of incidences, and also to For's article, and is I think the context has changed. I feel it in my role as a rabbi, as a community leader. And the kinds of stories and the number of stories that come to me from our youth, from our teens, and other people who are in activist spaces, it's different now than it was 10 years ago when I was hearing those stories and experiencing them. So I appreciate the sort of the zooming out that speech asks us to do. I think it's important. And also, as someone who's a student of Jewish history, I think earlier tonight you were having that great talk with some parents about how we talk about anti-Semitism to our youth, and this reality that with the glaring exception of Nazi Germany, in which there was never an exit ramp for Jews experience, it was a blood-based, race-based anti-Semitism, and so there was no escape for those Jews. At almost every other point in history, Jews have had an escape. You just have to give up an essential part of your Jewish identity, and then you'll be safe. And in Christian Europe, that was to convert, right? And now, I think in certain areas, in certain contexts in our American life and around the world, all you have to do is give up your love of Israel. All you have to do is give up your Zionism if you feel strongly about that, and then you'll be safe, and we'll leave you alone. And I see that as a parallel that I'm trying to wrap my head around. The head of the student of Jewish history. What does that mean? Is that something legitimate to ask of a Jew, to stop caring so deeply about this land, about its people, about Jews around the world who need that place? Maybe if we in America have been so fortunate not to need it as a refuge like other people have. So it does resonate with me as well, as does that feeling that you're recounting from people who came to volunteer. I always feel a particular kind of relief and safety when I'm in Israel, but to go there since October 7th, even amidst the war and all the horrors and all the fear around it, to be among people who are feeling the same kind of pain and angst and concerns, and to be able to be out loud about that, and realizing how silent often we have to be about it here, that resonates as well.
Yeah, you go first.
So first of all, I want to also get into it a little bit more. So like, here's my thing that I'm saying. Giving up all I have to do is give up my love for Israel and my Zionism. Okay. And I think we're going to also get into the Zionism aspect and where that stands. And I'm asking really this because here's my other challenge. I'm hearing people coming to Israel, and we could have different conversations in Israel than I can have here. Okay? Now, I have not done that with you on Zoom. I was sitting in Israel, and you guys joined my Zoom. So in a way, I invited you into that. But here, also sitting in this safe space, right? Giving up a love of Israel. You don't have to you could also be critical of aspects of this war without giving up your Zionism. And it's happening in Israel, right, within Israel, and it's not all or nothing, thankfully, because you said, and I read, just echoing, Nazis, when I teach, World War II and the Shoah, it's exactly as you said, all the other anti-Semitism, what makes it unique more than the numbers is that there wasn't an option at all. It wasn't against Judaism, it was against Jews, okay? And here, and I'm already going to bring it, okay? There is a problem. Some people are against Jews, yes. And some people are against a war which is causing the death of a tremendous amount of Palestinians, right? And that I'm already bringing that up and saying, and asking really with that question, how in America, that is a challenge. How can you feel, on the one hand, I want to support Israel, but be critical of Israel, but anything that I say that's critical of Israel to the outside world in America puts me in a camp that alienates me from somewhere. So I guess I'm making a statement with a question, right? But I really see, it's a challenging thing, and I wish for you and for us. And I guess one more thing of Barry Weiss that she said, she kind of criticized us doing this, what we're doing right now.
Yes.
Yeah. If you forever listen to the speech, she said, how did she say it?
She said that
it's perverse.
She said it's perverse. Yeah, you can say it.
It's perverse to debate whether anti-Semitism equates to anti-Zionism.
Yeah, she said in Jewish spaces to seek to discern any sort of differences or boundaries between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is a perverse act. So we're performing a perverse act tonight.
So, and I want to say,
so let's talk
with
about
my reflection on what where she was speaking. So I'm going to say in that setting, okay, for that. But where are we? What is the setting? And I guess also setting up. We are a setting of a learning community, okay? And so it is the opposite of perverse, at least, because where we are and why we're here. And hopefully that will really, as we said, it's going to be an interesting evening, so we have to disagree and we have to touch on things that are a little bit more controversial and challenging. And I see heads nodding in multiple directions. That's how we're already doing a good job.
So you said some people are against Jews and some people are against a war that's killing thousands of Palestinians. And I'm going to tie those two together, and I'm going to cite a research from Eitan Hirsch, who's a political scientist at Tufts. Since I'm the sociologist, it's on me to bring all the data. So that's what I'm doing, okay? And that's why I have notes, so I don't mess it up. Okay, and so he actually did research before the war and then followed up with the same people after the war, and this is a very solid representative sample of Jewish and non-Jewish college students. And one of the things that is profoundly, I think, striking in his report is the social cost that Jewish students experience by supporting Israel. So he found, and this is because he actually surveyed non-Jews, he found that 1 out of every 5 non-Jews, so 20%, won't be friends with someone who supports Israel. That's a pretty significant implication for social life on campus and how Jewish students legitimately have to navigate their social identity and their Jewish identity, right? So it's not just these people are against Jews or these people are against the war. These are students who are against Jews who may not even support the war, but they support Israel. And so what we are seeing on college campuses this prevalence of exclusion, and it is particularly prevalent amongst students of color, LGBTQ students, and among less affluent students, which is interesting. So there's a whole social dynamic about sort of like who is most sort of on the side of excluding Jewish students based on their beliefs. So I was in college, a long time ago, at the turn of the century. I cannot imagine a world in which my views on Israel had any implication for my friendships. That just seems absurd. So in those 20 years, I think things have changed tremendously.
So I also was in college at the turn of the century, and I remember, I didn't think about it till this moment, but the first time that I ever did encounter that was at the turn of the century. A college friend of mine who was Lebanese, and he had never met a Jew before. And he said in my presence, "I just hate Jews." And then he realized who he was in front of, and we were friendly. And so he said, "No, I didn't mean that. I just hate Zionists," which was a fascinating. I mean, I had never heard that distinction before in my life at that point, and I thought it really stuck with me. Although I forgot about him for a little while, but it was the first time that I encountered any kind of distinction, or it ever occurred to me that Zionism would put me in a different category with anyone.
Do you have an idea what he meant when he said Zionist, since it now has?
So I think we should talk about that now.
Right.
So thank you for that. We have obviously made the decision tonight that despite Barry Weiss's talk, that it's important to just at least explore these different facets of the moment with regard to anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and potentially just anti-war, and how we kind of sort out and suss out what is happening, what is the moment that we're living in. And there's another poll. I have one poll I can share from the I think this one is from Brandeis.
Pulpit.
Yeah. But it was a poll. This one came from the second podcast that we shared, "Is Zionism Dead? Redefining Identity in 2025." It's a fascinating conversation. Michal Biton, who I know is a colleague and friend of Ilana's, and Noam Weissman. Okay. Anyway, the poll was of Jews living in Los Angeles, and the results were that 42% of Los Angeles Jewry identified themselves on a survey as being Zionist. 42%. 88% of answers on the poll agreed with the statement, "I consider it important for Israel to exist as a refuge for the Jewish people now and in the future." So more than double the number of people would agree with a statement that I think that I would say that's the essence of what Zionism means, at least to me. But they were not feeling comfortable using that word, and would love to talk about what that's all about. How does that meaning of Zionism shift in different contexts? What have you studied and learned about it, Ilana, and how does it come up in Israel?
So start in Israel.
Great.
Okay? For this time. I think we were talking about with anti-Semitism and in general, it has a very broad history, but we focus it. It was taken in most recently, which is thankfully not so recently, but the Holocaust, and then everything has to be in that light. So we understand that words have meaning, and they are have different aspects in different places. Let's go to Israel. So we learned together that on sessions 1 and 2 really, that there were many streams of Zionism. So if we even polled those who came to the first Zionist Congress, they would answer yes to Jews have a right to a state, and we should establish it. How? We have divergence, right? And please understand, if I was citing 5 different streams of Zionism, we're looking at history. there was so much weaving in between, right? I had to boil it down to give 5, so that we know that there were so many perspectives of what was Zionism to begin with, or how to actualize Zionism to begin with. So let's jump to today, okay? People in Israel will say Zionist, okay? But the ones who are saying Zionist at the top, right? If I'm saying like a gap year course defines itself as a Tzioni, right? The ones that will put the Tzioni on the top of their publications are most of the time nowadays the religious right wing, okay? The religious Zionist. And let's go into there for a second. So the ones and now I'm going to put them also, we've learned, I'm talking about those who are ideological settlers in the West Bank, whether they physically live there or they support it, right? Or the idea of living in all of Eretz Israel is the actual next stage of Zionism. I know we're in discussion, so I'm going to cut it short because I'm not going to do my full teaching. So what that did is it made it less comfortable for people who are not in favor of settling in the West Bank to call themselves Zionists. The comfort in Israel is that it doesn't matter, right? I live here. I don't have to define myself as a Zionist or not. This is my house. This is where I live, okay? So yeah, I am in favor of my house staying my house and my neighborhood continuing to be here. And then there's politics of where the majority should be democratic and all that. So it's like, so there isn't that need to self-define as a Zionist. I'll finish off with saying, until you need to. And if I take the example of judicial reform that we had in our last class, the Zionists, as I put it, the Israeli Zionists right now, have also taken the flag. And what happened spontaneously in the beginning of the protests in January of 2023 against the judicial reform is that on the 3rd week of the protests, okay, there was a question of flags in this way, and they said, you know what, we're taking the flag back, okay? And the ones who were saying, we're not against the state, we're against the government policy that is going over because we are in favor of the state and this is our flag and you're not going to take it away from me. So in that way, without saying, not the word, right, Zionism, but I think that with taking back the flag is parallel, just in different terminology in that way. So that's where I think the conversation of Zionism would be today in Israel.
Thank you. Great. Love that.
So I'll touch on this point about the Israeli left reclaiming the flag. So I was in Israel in March 2023 at the judicial reform protests, and I remember this feeling of like complete awe at the idea that I could go to a leftist protest and sing the Tikva with an Israeli flag wrapped around myself.
That's romantic.
And the reason is because I cannot imagine ever in the United States going to a leftist rally wrapped, I won't even like hang a US flag because liberals in America don't hang flags. That's a right thing to do. Right, to wrap ourselves in the American flag if you are more on the left and then sing our national anthem, like that doesn't happen. So I remember feeling like, wow, this is a thing that is just notable as a sociologist. But okay, on this thing about Zionism, there is a sort of slew of research coming out right now that's pointing to the fact that Americans have no idea what Zionism means. Actually, neither do Canadians. And I actually realized this 2 years ago when I received I used to live in the Bay Area, I get the magazines, and this is like the J Weekly, and there was an article in there about how at Berkeley, in the law school, they were passing a resolution that like they were no longer allowing Zionist speakers to come to campus. And I said to my husband, wow, I guess I can't give any talks at Berkeley going forward. And he said, why not? And I said, well, because, I identify as a Zionist. And he said, you do? And I said, we've been married for like 15 years. We donate a lot of money to Israel. What are you talking about? I said, what is Zionism? What do you think it means? And he was like, doesn't it have something to do with racism? And I was like, oh my God, we have a lot of work to do in this country. Do not tell him I shared this story, even though it is on public record. So if my own husband, who is married to a Jewish studies professor, does not know what Zionism means, right, that says a lot. And in fact, the research shows that there is a huge divergence of opinion. And so sometimes you'll see in the paper, it'll say something like 97% of Jews are Zionist. And that's coming from usually a question that isn't about, are you a Zionist? It's about a question like, how emotionally attached are you to Israel? Oh, 90% of Jews are probably emotionally attached to Israel. And then journalists or whomever will take that to mean I'm a Zionist. Mira Sukharov, this is an article from Haaretz from 2022. She's an academic, I can't remember where, but she did a survey where she asked people, people identified as a Zionist, and then she asked them, okay, well, do you feel attached to Israel? Does that make you a Zionist? And they were like, yeah, most of them said yes. And then she said, do you believe in a Jewish and democratic state? And they were like, oh yes, that means Zionism. And then she said, what if Zionism means the belief in privileging Jewish rights over non-Jewish rights in Israel? And then all of a sudden, a lot of Zionists were like, ooh, I don't know if I agree with that. That doesn't sound so good. So there's a lot of ways in which that question can be asked in a way that is more palatable or less palatable to people, and how you ask the question and whether you give it a definition, I think gives a big variation in who associates with that, and the word Zionism definitely has a marketing problem in this country.
One more thing in this, because I want to come back to Israel. In the Knesset, there will be many times where people will like, let's put them, when the Arab Party comes up, they say, oh, you're anti-Zionist, you're this, that, using it as a derogatory term in that way. There are also a lot of Jews, or specifically there's a member of Knesset, Ofer Kasif, who is a Jewish man, or was born Jewish, and he is in the Hadash Party, and then he joined the Joint Arab Party, and he is called an anti-Zionist time and time again. So I want to take again, let's get the word Zionism out for a second, and just deal with Israel. Right? It's Israel. It's a country. It's like there are people who will be very happy to say Zionism was good until it achieved its goal, and then it morphs into a place that is that has governments that change and make laws and legislations, and part of those laws are wonderful, and part of those laws are terrible, right? And part of those laws are necessary, like, right? And it's a government that is then and I think the hardest thing for Israelis on all of that is to deal with the ongoing having to defend the fact that we are legitimate as a country. And that, like, let's just deal with that, right? The anti-Zion, it's strange for me. It's like this is the conversation that I have when I speak with American Jewish communities, okay? But there's the concept of, does Israel, like the legitimacy of Israel to just be a country that you could criticize for making terrible decisions. Okay? And Israel, like there's their laws, and there's the Jewish state, but then there's the nation state law of 2018, which totally, like, the people who protested the most, okay, were the Druze, who are a religious minority who is extremely loyal and good in all parts of Israeli society. They're like, excuse me, like, Israel, not Zionist, not anything. Excuse me, Israel, where do I sit in this with this new law that was just passed? Okay, so kind of going to the whole and I understand it's again that zoom out. So I want to also ask, like, finish with, or again, statement and wrapped in a question. It's like, and I'm saying, actually no, it's a request. Stop imposing your values, and talking to the world, on our situation one-to-one. We got our major issues, right? We got major issues in Israel, and they deserve to be looked at from within the Israeli. Not saying if in America this would happen, then we would do this and that. Therefore, if that happened in Israel, you must do that and the other. Okay? So that's kind of a request. And then I'm going to add, because I also taught about blind spots today, and then I ask myself, wait, where's my blind spot? Maybe sometimes we do have to be told that something that we are, like, Israeli policy, law, or all, is just really wrong, and we're such a blind spot that we don't realize that we have lost a direction. So I'm putting that and recognizing that there are blind spots, but in this way and that.
So there was in that podcast there was a discussion about whether or not this word with its PR problem is useful in any way at this point. In these two deep lovers of Israel on the podcast, we're talking about should it be like the reclaiming of the flag at the protests, and say you can't take this idea away from me just because you define it one way doesn't mean that I have to buy into that. Or should it be something that's just retired because mission accomplished? There is a state, and maybe we don't need to fight so hard for that word. I found it in my work as a rabbi really counterproductive to work with the word Zionist and anti-Zionist, because what I found in lots of long conversations with wonderful, ethical people who were really struggling after October 7th, we were using those words and meaning completely different things by them. It was, talking about a knife but holding up a fork, and I found that if we talked about values and we talked about emotions, we got so much further into the conversation than talking about labels. It was just sort of a de-memification impulse in me. And so I find that if what we're interested in is trying to find common ground, right? Right? We're trying to find that space of agreement and spaces where we can work together and dwell together and not fight even if we don't agree, then using labels like that is really not helpful. Better to talk more about values and loves, and like in Amikai's poem, the place where you are right. That beautiful poem. He says, from the place that you're right, nothing can grow. But if you plant and plow with doubts and loves, then something can emerge, and that is definitely what I found as a rabbi. But I wonder how you. It sounds like Elhanan, you feel like, at least from your seat, these labels are not helpful, or are masking something much more substantive. Yeah.
Probably.
And Ilana, when you're an academic and a scholar, you're also very often with young people on college campuses. How do you see the generational differences in relation to Israel and Zionism among students that you're witnessing? Because I think there's probably a lot of comfort in historical context that comes from a multi-generational community that isn't present necessarily among young people.
So I have a bit of I live in a skewed world. I have overwhelmingly, I think, pro-Israel Jewish students taking my classes. So I don't think and I came from being a decade at Stanford, which was a very different sort of social and political climate. There's definitely generational differences, right? We know that people who are older, and this has been for a long time, that there's a pretty significant divergence in connection to Israel, right? That older Jews feel more connected to Israel and feel like a deeper love for Israel than younger generations. And also, my college students have grown up in a very different world that has been where they didn't grow up during the Intifada, right? They don't sort of know the threat that people felt from bus bombings and suicide bombings in cafes. They also haven't seen any sort of political leader in Israel who has done very much to try to bring about, I would say, peace. I mean, there was, right, even, yeah. I grew up at a time of Rabin, which is a very different thing to witness than growing up over the past 15 years. And I think that makes sort of a mark on my views of Israel trying to come to some sort of peaceful living situation with the Palestinians. But rather than me talking about my own students, I will just talk about Eitan Hirsch's study, because I think that's better evidence. So he finds, first of all, that among his sample, about 10 to 15% of college students oppose a Jewish state. So the overwhelming amount are in favor of a Jewish state, regardless of whether they identify as a Zionist or not. And here I'll just say, this is not from Eitan, but like in sociology, we have this theory about social identity, and you're also always trying to negotiate your social identity, and you have many social identities, right? Your gender identity and your political identity, and those identities are fluid and they change in the context. And college students are really trying to figure those out, and when one identity, like if claiming a Zionist identity comes at a social cost, they may be less likely to say on a survey that I'm a Zionist, even though they may very much support the ideals of Israel. So part of what we see in surveys, like the divergence between the older and younger people, might not be an actual reflection of, as much a reflection of like attitudes about Israel as it is like the willingness to have the social cost of a label that isn't favorable in your social milieu. But he also finds that there are particular demographics that have more or less favorable views. So for example, he finds that wealthier students compared to non-wealthy Jewish students are more in favor of a Jewish state. And pro-Israel students also have more politically diverse friends, whereas Jewish students who are opposed to a Jewish state or opposed to Israel have more homogenous, ideologically homogenous friends, which is very interesting to me. And that students who are generally against having a Jewish state, they have less of a strong Jewish upbringing, they are more likely to be LGBTQ, they're more politically liberal, and the one that I found so interesting is they're also lower socioeconomic, of a lower socioeconomic status, and I do a lot of research on Jews in class, and sort of the idea that there's a socioeconomic dimension to this, I think is very, very interesting.
What do you extrapolate from that? Do you extrapolate like opportunities to travel there or to participate in education programs that, like, do you draw any conclusions?
I think that there's probably sort of a confluence of factors. One is that less affluent Jews tend to be less engaged in Jewish life, and so they have probably less of Jewish education, less opportunities to go to Israel. And it could also be that in college spaces, like first-gen low-income students often hang out with other first-gen low-income students. There are not that many first-gen low-income Jewish students. So if you are a lower-income Jewish student, you are probably hanging out with other racial and ethnic minorities and not Jews, and that is probably also influencing their own perceptions.
Fascinating.
Okay. I'm going to be very Israeli right now. So what? I'm serious. Like, so what? When I'm going to take those statistics and try to superimpose them without these surveys into Israeli society. Okay. Since you spoke about we grew up at the same time period, so the Rabin time, and I do remember a poll that said when you asked people if they believed that peace was possible, it was much, much higher in the 90s, early 2000s than it is today. And I shared also in my class that the first intifada ends with negotiation that fails, and the second intifada comes to separation. And the separation was a necessity in 2005. Well, 20 years later, people who are 20, right, or 18 are voters or soldiers have lived with full-on separation. So the sociology is going to affect it very much into how I even respond to or react to the war that's going on, and what I feel about the effects of the Palestinians. Okay? And when it is that separation, those unforeseen results is that there is a much less of a feeling. And it's not only because of fear anymore. I'm putting it again, non-statistics, so this is holding, and also very much anecdotally. There are people who are not recognizing the other. I said it yesterday, the lunch and learn. It is not Palestinians, it is the enemy. Now, why are they all the enemy? Because I don't know them, they're behind a wall. Right? Now, why are they behind a wall? Because they're not Israeli. Why would they? There's a separation. But that leads me, and that's why I ask the so what, okay? Because the so what in Israel is affecting the way in which not only the war is being fought, but the way in people's reactions to the war it's being fought, the care in which to look further and come to my own conclusions. And this is things that are going to have this, okay? This is going to have long-term effects. I want to add one more thing. Kohelet, Shlomo HaMelech, he wrote, there's a, and then Bob Dylan took it, or not Bob Dylan, who was it? Seasons, turn. Thank you, okay. I apologize to my brothers for misquoting music. There's a season for everything. We are at a time of war, okay? There's a season, Kohelet said it, there's a time of war, there's a time of peace. A time of peace doesn't like war, it pushes it away. A time of war pushes away peace. It's like, this is my turn now, okay? This is my turn now, and now if I put it into people, this is the hawk's time to say, see, I told you so, and this is what I'm going to do about it, and all you doves, shut up, not your turn. Okay, I recognize that. There's a season. My fear, real fear that I'm going forward, when the season is over, what will it look like? And I'm fearful for that, because that is not, for me, I feel it not in the statistics, I feel it in the streets. Okay? And I feel it walking around, and it is hard. And the people are, and here's where the big difference, because I would not be able to complete this sentence that I just said in Israel. I would already get yelled back at. Right? You are much more kind. You're in the United States and in the South. Okay? So you're wonderful. But I wouldn't be able to say this because, like I said in the beginning, skin in the game. And more or less that's why I could say to you, exactly, because I am the voice of, as if, peace, and it is not time for me right now. So I have to recognize that at least. But
so speaking of that, we wanted to spend some time talking about specifically what the political dynamics are within Israel, among particularly Israeli Jews, who are who are the majority and the power structure. Can you talk a little bit about? We can split it, Dov Hawk, left right tensions, but what do you feel like is happening today in terms of the political divides within Israel? When you think about what comes after, what will the big questions be?
So I'm glad I gave that so I don't have to go into that now. I'm going to say I wanted to, just as I said, that's why I need to recognize that it's a season, okay? So which means that I don't get to hear all the voices right now, okay? I understand that there are voices that are holding their tongue for all reasons. So therefore, it's hard to know. And it's really hard to know. I'm not going to believe even the polls because they're asked at a certain moment. And if they're asked today, and I'm going to put this in right now, in what time is it? Okay.
Yeah,
it's 8:30. Okay. In 3.5 hours, according to the Hamas schedule, okay, we are getting 4 bodies back. Okay? You really think a poll is going to be the same today as it was 2 weeks ago? So I want to recognize that I have no idea. Okay? And the reason I have no idea is because it's so gut-wrenching, and it's just a tizzy. So I don't know.
So one of the challenges, I think, and American Jews, most are liberal. There's not a small percentage that are conservative. In our voting record, I think, what is it, like maybe 2/3 or 3/4 Democrat for most elections?
Yeah, it's about 70% Democrat, 20% Republican, and 10% in the middle, or undecided.
So one of the challenges is that for the American Jewish community that has been saved by liberal democracy, been saved by liberalism, right? We are safe now because of the multicultural democracy that we live in, to try to understand and explain and sometimes even defend a furthering right-wingness of the Israeli government becomes very difficult. The embrace of President Trump in Israel was difficult the first time around, is also difficult now, because most Jews, the vast majority of Jews, didn't vote for him and are very upset that he is the president, with the exception, of course, of his efficacy in negotiating the ceasefire and the hostages, getting the hostages back. But how do you relate to that challenge? I mean, what would you say to us about that challenge? Why is that happening?
So wait, let me understand the question better.
Yeah, there's
okay?
two parts to the question.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
So
part one is the embrace of Trump, and part two is that the liberal democracy facet of Israel feels. I mean, it's not its time right now either, right?
Okay, so I'm gonna let's answer the first one, because that's fun. Okay, why do Israelis like Trump? Okay, because they're not looking at you, right? Jewish Americans those who choose to, or in this room, you have to. I went to your sanctuary, beautiful, by the way. 2 flags. What? You have 2 flags of a different country. I get it. I know why, right? Of course. We don't have 2 flags, so why do we care what's going on in America for Americans? And the only thing that is, so it's like, who cares if Trump is this, that? He's funny. He's a good, he's great for the comedy. Oh, and by the way, some things that he did were Israelis liked. He moved the embassy. Some people liked it, some people didn't. Some people didn't care. By the way, he didn't build a building. He said that, fact check. The building existed. It was just it turned from the consulate to the embassy. And where it is in a specific DMZ, right? You got to get very specific that nobody does. People do, Trump didn't. Goes into, right? But there's nuance there. But at the end of the day, officially recognized, that's pleasant, that's calming and I'm going to give one little example that I think this is what taught me. So I had an Iranian guy visit. He was living in San Francisco. He came for his company, and I was his tour guide for a few days. And he says he's Muslim, Iranian, and he left Iran when he was 16 years old, because he was told to step on an American and Israeli flag in school, and he and his parents were like, wait, why am I doing that? And they are opposing, because the Iran is not, there is the Islamic Republic of Iran. That's not all the Iranians. And there are people who are opposed to that. And he comes to Israel, right? With an American passport. He comes to Israel and he says to me, I don't really care what you guys say about Bibi. He's the only world leader that is speaking so adamantly against who I oppose in my home country. Therefore, I like Bibi. Okay? And that is my best example for why Israelis, by and large, because they didn't ask what Trump is doing to you, all the things that are important to you. They didn't ask. They don't care. So that's my why there's such vast support.
And what would you say is the sort of, I guess, how would you react, or how have you taken in the reaction to this current coalition and the what is it, Yamin Maleh?
Yamin al-Maleh, right.
Yeah. To the far right government inclusion of this sort of messianic Kahanist elements, like how?
I can't be more clear about this. Okay, this one I'm gonna it was so clear to everyone, including the far right, that this might be an anomaly, so don't miss any chance to do it, right? The fact that Ben-Gvir was given the kosher stamp, he was so extreme, right? The fact that he's coming into it's like, I'm going to do everything I can right away, right now. And now I'm going to be very clear, and the war is in his favor. Okay? The war is in Ben-Gvir's favor, and he is the chief, or was, the Minister of Interior Security, Internal Security. In other words, he is the boss of the chief of police. Okay? And he recognized, oh my God, this is like, I am in the candy shop, I'm in a candy shop. So he did everything and used the war to give permits for guns. And he says very happily, look, everybody's got a gun. Well, not for the war, because the war will eventually be over and those permits are still there. Okay? And it is clear, but now we have this war, and you have to keep a coalition. So suddenly we got to a situation where it's been almost, and again, we're in the middle of war, so it's time of war, but during the war, it's normalized, right? And he has been normalized, and what we need to look forward is, will we make sure that when soon, time of war is past, that we also make sure that things that were normalized during this time of war. And I'm going to say just one last thing to finish with this, because it's in the gut. I know who my enemies are in this war, and I'm going to be anyone who thinks it's good. Anyone who thinks this war is good, that's who I'm opposed to. And that means within Israel, there are people that think it's good. Okay? So that's who my enemy is in this war.
Thank you. Ilana, will you talk a little bit about your observations? You made, I think, some really fascinating observations about the way that American liberals might view the Zionism and the right wing of Zionism in Israel, based on our experiences with Christian nationalism here.
Yeah. Okay, so these are thoughts that have been percolating, and I wrote some of them down, so I might look at my paper. Okay, so I hang out with a lot of sociologists of religion, and sociologists of religion, who are a very cool group of people, love to talk about the rise of Christian nationalism. So I spend a lot of time, or some time, thinking about the rise of Christian nationalism, which, just by definition, is often associated with the vision that this country, the United States, is fundamentally rooted in white Anglo-Protestant culture, right? But this vision can lead to the exclusion or marginalization of those who are religiously or ethnically other, such as non-Christians, including Jews, immigrants, and racial minorities. By the way, right, the march in Charlottesville, Jews will not replace us, that is part of Christian nationalism, right? The idea that Jews could possibly replace white Christians is a fear. And by the way, research shows, I know a lot of people sort of talk about anti-Semitism on the left and sort of concern about anti-Semitism on the left. Again, Eitan Hirsch from Tufts did a study where he found that actually a lot of the most overt anti-Semitism is coming from young conservatives, and that the young far right are 7 times more likely than the far left to hold Jewish Americans responsible for Israel. So I feel like people have forgotten that the right is a source of a lot of anti-Semitism. But in thinking about Christian nationalism, the idea that, my hypothesis, and I don't have the data to back it up, so you are the first people to hear it, is that the rise of Christian nationalism in the United States over the past decade, which has obviously been magnified by Trump, is really, could be contributing to the American progressives' negative views towards Israel. Here's why. American progressives really oppose Christian nationalism and ethno-nationalism. Why? It is exclusionary, it's antithetical to the ideas of pluralism and democracy and human rights. Movements like white nationalism in the US are viewed as dangerous because they prioritize one ethnic or cultural identity over another. And it's inconsistent with multicultural values, right? The progressives, they say their values emphasize multiculturalism and inclusion and equal rights for all, regardless of ethnicity or religion. But ethno-nationalism by its nature prioritizes, or Christian nationalism, right, prioritizes one group. And so there's all sorts of reasons why there's progressives hate Christian nationalism. What does Israel have to do with it? Because Israel is an ethno-nationalist project. And so for people who are maybe unfamiliar or even familiar with Israel and sort of Zionism, the idea that there should be a country that is privileges or that is based on one's ethno or religious background is just like immoral to them on a fundamental basis. And so this is what I'm trying to, I want to sort of dig deeper into the data, but is this progressive sort of disgust with Christian nationalism, which is on the rise, contributing to this anti-Israel attitude that we're seeing in this country? So that's what I'm pondering these days.
Thank you.
So one other thing. The other reason why this matters, so in the United States, you've probably heard that Americans are becoming less religious. So you can imagine that if you are a young person, chances are that you're not institutionally attached to a church, the idea that a country would be sort of founded for a particular religious group is sort of antithetical to their own views, right? If you don't believe in religion as a valuable organizing principle of life, you're probably not going to be behind the idea of Israel as a society.
Thank you. So we're going to take a few minutes now for I'll give you that. We'll take a few minutes now for questions. I'm going to bring you the mic so we can make sure we capture it on the live stream.
At the beginning, y'all talked about the rise of the mob and how that would be dangerous for Jews. I think we are, in fact, seeing that in this country. You had Charlottesville, as you mentioned before. You have Trump and Stephen Miller, who I believe is Jewish, leading part of that fight. You have Trump talking about the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers stand back and stand by and getting them all pardons for the violence on January 6th. So I think it's there. I think it's very dangerous, and I think we'd be foolish not to take it seriously.
Barry Weiss would certainly agree with you, among others, I'm sure. Yeah, Sarah.
So just first, I'm very grateful for this conversation. It's like the first time I've not felt crazy thinking about this, because I think what we're all talking about, and I struggled with Barry Weiss's, some of her statements, is there's a lot of nuance here, right? Like even comparing Christian nationalism to Israel, Judaism is a religion, it is also an ethnic, and a nationality, makes it more complicated. But I was really struck, Elhanan, by what you said about the Israeli left reclaiming the flag. Because, so, just last Friday, I was driving downtown and saw a graffiti that said, Zionism equals Nazism. And my first thought was like, no, it doesn't. Words have meaning, and I think frequently we let I don't want to say opponents, but we let the other side define our terms. I think pro-life, pro-choice is a perfect example, right? We have a branding problem. And I think it's interesting to then go back and say, and even amongst Jews who don't know what Zionism means, that we need some basic definitions of these things. These words have meaning, and the more we kind of throw them around, don't use them, they're losing even more meaning.
I'll just say, like, my students and I were talking after the Super Bowl about the Robert Kraft ads and against hate, which are trying to fight against anti-Semitism. I personally think they're like the biggest waste of money ever. But I do wonder now, given your point, like, why didn't he just invest the money to make a commercial about Zionism? And like, what is Zionism? I wonder if that crossed his mind. I don't know.
That wouldn't work. Seriously, it's trying to justify something that is so vilified right now. So Sarah, I'm going to just agree with you, and I think that I'm saying that one of the things that when I was writing, and I can use this opportunity also, when I was thinking of what I'm teaching, is to start with a few, not definitions, but at least the background as to where Zionism grew from, and recognizing that it branched out to different directions, and where it is today is not where it started. Okay? It's not. It has a different words. Let's recognize it as much as possible. So at least, but where was I doing? Who was I speaking to? I was speaking to, and here's my chance to say, I also listened to you. I was at Kol Nidre. You guys were here? Yeah? I listened in, right? And so Rabbi Bauman, also when you were, the words that you said, we need to start a conversation. So first of all, I want to commend you, because I think that you should commend her, because you're a woman of your word, right? And the fact that we're sitting here, how many times things you say on Yamim Noraim stay there, and then you remember them again next year. So, באמת כל הכבוד to you as a community for stepping up and seeing the new year, and for giving me the honor to be one who is part of that, of facilitating, so that you could, because this is where the conversation can happen. And let's also recognize where it can't happen. Okay, Super Bowl ad, not going to happen. Okay, but and I'm going to go back to, it was Tu B'Shvat, and I taught one of the lessons over there. Where are your roots? Okay, so we at least know our roots, and then and we have to also see where branches need to be trimmed, shifted, grafted, right, and not just accept that it just grows wild.
Oh yes, let's take care. We'll go Jenny, and then Jamie, and then.
So, thanks, this has been amazing. Katie, you said something to me after October 7th, and you were helping so wonderfully at Tulane after the protests, and you said, how is Tulane going to keep their students safe? And I still am grappling with you asking me that question. And the words, tonight I'm hearing about different words and how different words mean things. I'm not even sure what you meant by safe. I'm like, well, they're physically safe and we have police all over the place, but I don't think that's what you meant. I think that you meant they should be able to walk to class without hearing taunts, but then should they? Because why is so much of this happening on university campuses? So much of this is happening on university campuses because this is a moment in time when students can learn and grow and define what they want, and they are a really important audience. So the question really is, do we really want them to be safe psychologically with what they're hearing on campus, or do we want them to learn and grow and have the support to get to a place where they feel confident? And we have educators here, and of course, Katie, you're our educator, so I'd love your thoughts.
I suspect what I meant, if I asked you that question now, what I would mean is that there is the strength of the United States is supposed to be that we are able to show up in all of our diversity and have and be accepted, right? That it's not supposed to be a melting, I know we talk about a melting pot, but it's supposed to be like a salad, right? A tossed salad, and that everybody is able to maintain their identity and their uniqueness and their particularity. And I think what I feel like I'm reacting to now is this conditionality of acceptance that I think many Jews feel on campuses and elsewhere. Just a conditionality that I don't want to be there, and I think that conversation is one that we need to have, because it's not very brave to say, this much of you is allowed to be out in the open, and the rest of your iceberg has to be hidden for me to not shout at you for what you're wearing or what your T-shirt. My daughter wore a T-shirt with Hebrew on it to school today, and I had that feeling like, well, is she gonna be harassed for just wearing Hebrew on her T-shirt? So I think that's what I'm grappling with. But I'll take this opportunity to say I really appreciate the way that Tulane has shown up for its students, certainly in a stronger way than some other universities, and we're really grateful. I think there's lots of people who are creating that kind of shelter. Jamie, and then we'll.
So this may be sort of simplistic, but Elhanan, you had said, I don't really people think that the war is good. What does good mean?
People think that the war is good, that it will forward the aims that they are hoping for. Okay? So Hamas thinks that the war is good. Okay? They are happy that the world right now, that we are having this conversation, because it was this close to not talking about the Palestinians at all, right? The Palestinian cause was pushed aside many, many, many times, right? And now there are Palestinian flags that are held with pride. That's good for Hamas. The Ben Gvir, okay, the ultra-right in Israel, sees an opportunity to, and I have it, tomorrow's class, Hamas, okay? There is a movement, this was last week's, right? The ultra-right saying, this is the moment, thank you for showing us, and we could lichbosh, legarish, v'leyashiv, to conquer, to expel, and to settle. In those words, they kind of toned it down a little bit, but those are the original words, and that's exactly what they mean. They are looking forward to using this opportunity because there's finally a war to expel, right? To expel the Palestinians. So they are happy with this war in that way. No, that's put Trump aside from them, okay? And if Trump could help them, fine. But it emboldens, yeah. But it's like it's non-issue. Like it's not the main thing.
What Elhanan's talking about is a messianic thrust in Judaism, but this is the land God gave, and it's a mitzvah to settle it and to conquer people who are on it.
But actually, I want to change the word messianic because that almost sounds too like spiritual. What was the word that you used with the Christian that you were just talking about with your? Yeah, Christian nationalism. So it's less messianic in like a waiting for the Messiah to come down from heaven. It is more of a religious nationalism in a very extreme way.
Yeah, extreme
so,
fundamentalism.
Like nobody's waiting for someone to come from heaven. They're saying we are going to be doing it here on the ground, okay, for the sake of heaven.
Thank you.
Hi. So I grew up this is about when you brought up the alarmist point about people saying there are attacks happening. So I grew up in a very Jewish area. I didn't really experience anything, like I've always felt part of a community and safe. I was studying abroad in Amsterdam last semester, and I was there when it happened. And the issue was there also were no alarmists. No one was there saying Jewish people are in danger. No one was there saying like there's other Jewish people there, like me and my friends, who are also being threatened. And we had to change, we changed our names on the Ubers because if they saw a Jewish name. And so I was just wondering, are alarmists also a good thing? Because if it's like a lonely feeling when no one is supporting you. And in Amsterdam, it's a very small Jewish community, and a lot of the people there did not take our side and were not so pro-Israel or sometimes just Jewish people in general. And I noticed it, especially around the college campus that I was at, I was an extreme minority just by being Jewish and just by thinking anything positive about Jewish people. Mm-hmm. And there was no one there besides me to speak out for me.
What's your name again?
Bradley.
Right.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you for sharing your lived experience, which is we hear it. It's very, very troubling, right? And that's the thing. Like these things are not theoretical. I was teaching for many, many years the Palestinian conflict and all this, and it was so theoretical, except for a few that did have effects. This is no longer theoretical. That's why, again, I'm so pushed back by the statistics, because it's lived experience, and it's very difficult to see the macro when you actively had to change your name on your Uber, okay? And I'm right now, okay. So there, Baruch, okay. But you had to make. So first of all, that sucks, and I say that with like a deeper meaning, but like without lack of words of empathy, okay. And for our discussion, that is what this is what one aspect of war. War is not just fought with tanks and planes and drones and guns. War has many, many fronts. And this is a direct effect of a war that's going on. And that's very, very real. Okay? So it's not going to change, it doesn't say, oh, and therefore we should, but it probably did for you. It probably informed your lived experience, probably informed something about the next time you're going to think, and therefore we should do something this way or that. So just being part of it is recognizing that you're living and affected by part of what's going on.
Well, I also just want to respond to Elhanan that the reason those statistics matter is because I think they point to something troubling in the Jewish community, which is internal division. And that is what I worry about, and that's why it's important to document and discuss.
I accept your importance.
All right, we're going to try to get to everybody in the last few minutes.
We're going to do rapid fire? Rapid fire.
Okay, couple rapid fire things. So I think it would be very much ideal if the conversation about Zionism, is it good, is it bad, what is it, were able to be an internal Jewish conversation. Probably not possible to achieve that. But I feel like when Zionism is at the center of the broader societal conversation, it sort of implies that one needs to subscribe to some special ideology just to believe that Israel shouldn't be destroyed, which should be, I would think, the normal position. But when it's framed that way, not being a Zionist is sort of implicitly the normal thing. So I guess the question is there a way to flip this and make the ism the sort of extreme ideological position that one member state of the United Nations ought to be destroyed? I think the word for that used to be rejectionism. I don't hear that word going around as much anymore, but that seems like that should be the thing that is the ism as opposed to Zionism. I mean, sure, Jews can internally talk about Zionism, our history, what it means to us, but I think trying to have a broader societal conversation about Zionism seems like it sometimes seems like a fool's errand to me. I wish it could be reframed. That's the first thing. The second thing, in terms of what's going on college campuses and activism and whatever, I guess maybe this is a question for Ilana. How do you see the role of sort of warmed over Soviet anti-Zionism in this mix? So the Soviet Union globally perpetuated like anti-Zionist ideology throughout the global left starting in 1967, which is why still to this day, if you join any progressive cause on a college campus, you know, you're against climate change, there'll be activists there to tell you, well, climate justice is inseparable from Palestine liberation in the intersectional struggle to liberate the oppressed peoples of the world. I mean, this is the conveyor belt through which young people are sort of exposed to this set of ideas. I know this from personal experience. So I was wondering if you have any observations on that or thoughts about that. Last thing, sorry. Yes, this is really the last thing. So in spite of like all of the stuff, polls show that the vast majority of Americans still support Israel, and my hypothesis, or what it seems like, is the main reason is because they see Israel as a Western democracy fighting against Islamic terrorism. Now, while that's maybe oversimplistic, it's also not entirely wrong. Most liberal Jews wouldn't want to frame it in those terms because talking about Islamic terrorism sounds kind of like right-coded and etc. I guess the question that I have about this is, are there any things that are kind of right-coded but might need to be said for the sake of say the truth, I guess? That's my question.
So we have, I think there are two questions posed. One was any comment on the sort of Soviet process conveyor belt theory, not theory, but reality. And the second one is about things that are maybe, I think Barry Weiss talked about saying things out loud that are, you know, politically incorrect, but are true. And we need to start being able to say them. That's what was one of her claims.
I don't have anything about the latter. I will say with the former, the story stuck with me. A student came to me last year who said, you know, I work at this hotline on campus for like sexual assault crises situations, and my group wants us to all sign this like anti-Israel letter. And she's like, I don't understand why these two things are being conflated. I want to work at the hotline, but I have no interest in signing this letter. So I agree with you, like that all these things get conflated. The post-Soviet thing, I don't know. I'm not a historian. I don't actually know that very well. I will say there was an interesting tidbit from one of Eitan Hertz's studies in that he found that non-Jewish students actually viewed college campuses as very pro-Jewish, pro-Israel, because they were looking at what the administrators were doing, and that's the message they got from administrators, whereas the students, Jewish students who said campus is very hostile towards us, but they were looking primarily at their colleagues, at their peers, the other students, faculty, and staff. And so like your perception of what happens on campus also has to do with whose messaging are you looking at.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vali. I'm a student at Tulane. So I say that I'm pro-Israel, and on campus I think for 95% of people who don't support Israel, that means, when I say that, that means I automatically hate all Palestinians. And it shouldn't, but it does. I think it's like saying, I like the color blue. That doesn't give you the right to assume anything about what I think of the color green, but for them it does. And so I guess my question is, we talked about like labels and how going away from that might open the opportunity for dialogue. I guess my question is it worth it to hide that part of my identity initially? Granted, I think most people on campus know my identity, but is it worth it to hide that Zionism or that side, pro-Israel side, to earn a seat at the table? And then a follow-up just for Barry Weiss, would we say that she was an alarmist if she had added the words at the end of her speech, like, despite this, Tulane is still a cultural hub and a thriving place for Jewish students, and they should all go there?
I'm gonna take this doing my thing of learning from history. We're in a precarious time period, and it's not comparable to any of the past because the world is different and media is different. I'm gonna actually give like a little tour guiding tidbit on a good old battle site from 1967 on Givat HaTachmoshet Ammunition Hill. There's one section after peace was signed with Jordan. There were fighters that fought on Ammunition Hill from the IDF and from the Jordanian side. That was in '67, so this is in '94. They came and they met and they had like a joint ceremony together. It was not in the press, it wasn't there because it wasn't, but it was done. Okay? And those people were literally fighting to kill each other on the same hill. Okay? So people during time, I'm going back to my time of war thing, are taking a side and they have to stand on that side because it is actual war. And when that time is done, you'll be able to say, I stood there because my priorities were straight, and now I get to put down some of my arms, and we could find that milchavas kama, that area that we can agree upon. So I'm hoping that happened in the past, and it's upon us to hopefully be able to do that in the future. That's
right there, and then we'll go Lauren and that.
So there's a lot of talk about the end of the war and what that might mean for Israel. I'm curious what you think about what that means for anti-Semitism in the US and globally, not necessarily that it'll end, but how it might morph.
So am I.
The surge in anti-Semitism, goes back to about 2016. So the war has certainly, I think, exacerbated it, but it didn't start with the war, right? It started when Trump got elected, and that is partly due to the fact that it emboldens the right, and it is the right who has a lot of traditional anti-Semitic views. So I don't know how much the war is actually going to influence that.
I want to conclude with just one final quote and question for us to wrap up. All right, it's fine. It's definitely time to go. Okay. At the end of her talk, she says, "I want to suggest to you that the task for us in this moment is to learn this state of mind and this state of being." And she's referring to the way that Jews who have experienced anti-Semitism through generations and are from countries where they never enjoyed the freedoms and privileges that we have, had to live this way. She says, this kind of state of being, the resilience, the vigilance, the mental strength, the courage, the pride, not just to survive, but to thrive in this new world that we are living in. So I would love for us to each say just a word about when we hear those words, that this is a time to really try to tap into a state of resilience and strength and pride, what that calls you to do or say.
Thank you for that. We're going to end optimistically, okay? We should do that, right? That's the thing. At least we have the privilege to do that here. Resilience, okay? This is Micha Goodman. I quoted him a bunch of times. He talks about, in Hebrew, it's wonderful. It's because the Hebrew language, right? It's chosin. Chet samech nun, that's the root. And the root for the other word that has the same root is chasinut, okay? And chasinut is immunity. And he says that when human, right, we have high levels of immunity, right? Nothing could hurt me. Then it actually lowers my levels of resilience. And when those who are less immune have to raise their levels of resilience. So I'm going to kind of bring that at this time, and I think that Barry was talking very much at this. Israelis have a higher level of resilience because we have been knocked down a lot. Now, again, let's talk only about the positive, right? What the positive aspect of resilience. And the positive aspect of resilience, I'm going to focus, there's the ability to forget. Yes, we've been doing this a lot today, and I tried a little bit to put it in, but a lot of the conversation is an internal conversation. We recognize that there is another side, but internally where we could be, and that's where our resilience is. So there are resilience centers all over Israel, okay, especially really top of the world in the south, okay, in the south of Israel. And I've had a few sessions and like visits to there. So there's one thing that I want to share from there, the Resilience Center. One is, just because you want it to be over, doesn't mean it's over. When you're ready to be out, doesn't mean, so therefore, you have to take those breaths and take the next step forward. Wake up and put one step in front of the other. And I don't know what's going to be, and it might be hard, it might be painful, but you wake up and you go, because we don't get to decide when things are over. And recognizing that helps me to get up and put one foot in front of the other. There are so many tools that we've learned from resilience, and it's actually something that Israel has before October 7th and since has been sharing with the world. Hopefully that it's not needed to be used in active roles, but it is of recognizing that it is wonderful to live in a world of immunity, but we have to recognize that we sometimes need to heighten our resilience of how do we get up when things are very challenging.
I think that's a beautiful way to end. I don't have anything to add.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and members of the class, we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow evening for our Siyum, and I want to once again thank these two amazing educators and communicators and scholars who our community is just really privileged to have access to. Ilana, thank you for being a part of this community and all the leadership that you bring and exhibit in New Orleans and beyond. And Elhanan, I feel like you're now part of the Touro family. So thank you so much for your resilience and your energy being with us in these last 2 days. And we'll look forward to tomorrow. Laila Tov, everybody.